Thus far, we've talked about overarching principles of document design. We've talked about page-level principles of document design, paragraph-level principles, and some font-level principles. We'll continue on and discuss some more font-level principles of document design. The thing we need to talk about next is spacing after periods. You want to use one and only one space after each period. Software is going to take care of the spacing issue for you. You want to retrain yourself. Break that two-space habit if you ever formed it. You want to, as Yoda said, unlearn. The reason we even have this idea that we need to put two spaces after a period is because computers are not mechanical devices, but typewriters are. So back in the day when the typewriter was invented, people needed to put two spaces to make sure that you could tell the difference between a dot in the middle of something and the true end of a sentence. So these top two here, these are what we call proportioned fonts. These are what we now use today in our computers. Notice that each letter has its own unique space. So the M is very wide, the I and the L are very skinny, the K is very wide, and the period has its own special amount of space. However, if we use a typewriter to make this thing, it's going to be produced in what we call a monospace font. That is, each letter is exactly the same width. So the letter M is the same width as the letter I, as the letter L, as the letter K, and that period is moved over a bit. It's not quite in the middle of that space, but if we put another letter right away after it, it would sort of look like it's mushed in. You couldn't tell if it was milk dot something, so you had to put in milk, period, space, space, in order to even be able to see the difference between the two and see where the sentence ended. Here's an example of what we're talking about. Take a look at the text on the top. It has two spaces after a period. Take a look at the bottom. It has one space after a period. The space at the top looks a little bit weird the longer you look at it, doesn't it? It's like, wow, there's a lot of space after that period. Yeah, so we don't do that anymore. Because we have proportioned fonts on computers, we push period, space, and then begin a new word. Hyphens, N dashes, and M dashes. These are pieces of punctuation that look similar, but they're actually quite different and they do different things. So here's what they do. A hyphen is going to join compounds together. An N dash will show a range. And an M dash works kind of like parentheses. Now, there are more uses for an M dash, but this is the most common use. And there are actually more uses for all these things, hyphens, N dashes, and M dashes. There are all sorts of possible special things that can be done with them. But if you want to consult a style guide, for example, the Chicago Manual of Style is a very good one. You can find all sorts of fun, interesting things to do with them. But for our purposes, we're going to use hyphens to join compounds, N dashes to show a range, and M dashes to work like parentheses. Here's examples of what we're talking about. A hyphen, you'll notice, is very short. An N dash is much wider, and an M dash is much, much wider. They're called N and M dashes because they are the width of the letter N and M in whatever typeface it is we're talking about. So that first line of examples, 1/2 and 8675309, those are just separators. So in the 1/2, that hyphen is showing it is part of a compound word. The 867-5309, that dash, there's a hyphen. It's showing it's a space between the clusters of letters, or numbers. Excuse me, those aren't letters, those are numbers. Then, on the next line, 48 N-53 and Adams N-DeSoto. What is that showing us? It's showing us that there's a range from 48 to 53 and from Adams through DeSoto. So, if I told you read pages 48 through 53 in your textbook, this is how I would write it out. How about look up the names Adams through DeSoto in the phone book? Well, this is how it would work. Adams through, that would be the N dash, DeSoto. Then the M dash in the last one. Cletus ordered the vilest, smelliest thing, natto, on the Japanese restaurant's menu. We could have just put parentheses around natto, but instead we used an N dash here. Or excuse me, an M dash, not an N dash, it's an M dash. In order to put these things in, I'm going to show you some full-sized PC keyboard shortcuts. You can always use the special characters menu in Microsoft Word, but to create a hyphen, you can use either the number row minus, or you can use the keypad minus. Either one will work just fine. To create an N dash, you need to press the Control and the keypad minus. If you try to press the Control and the number row minus, it won't work. To make an N or an M dash, you need to hit Control, Alt, and keypad minus. Now you can actually go in and program Microsoft Word and go into the special features of it, and I've done so on my computer, so I know how to program it or set the guts of Microsoft Word. So I just hit Control and then keypad minus, number row minus. That's on my computer. I have set it up that way. On most computers you're going to run into, you actually have to have that number pad in order to make it work correctly. Bullets and numbers. You need to know the difference. Both of these things are used in lists, but they have different functions. A number is going to indicate a order or hierarchy. A bullet will indicate everything that has a bullet is equal importance, and they can be shifted around. For example, Eustace, take the $20 bill on the table and buy these things at the store. Cat food, eggs, bread, paper towels, love Mom. So when Eustace takes the $20 and goes to the store, does it matter what he puts in his cart first? Cat food, eggs, bread, or paper towels? No, it doesn't matter. He just throws them all in his cart, takes them up to the cashier, and at the cashier, does it matter which one he pays for first? No, it doesn't matter at all. That means we can use a bulleted list here. We can shift paper towels to the top, then it won't matter one iota. How about the to-do list, though? 1, ride back to the grocery store. 2, buy Mom's list. 3, get change in pennies. 4, bring the pennies home. 5, check the pennies on my brother Cletus. Would it work to move these things around? Is this an order or a sequence, or is it a list of importance? Well, in this case, it's clearly a sequence, because if I move the things around, it won't work anymore. So therefore, this has to be a numbered list. It could not work as a bulleted list. Then we've got a list of Cletus's all-time favorite albums. Should this be a numbered list or a bulleted list? This is a little bit tricky. If this is a list of his favorite albums, as in number 1, Napalm Death, Apex Predator, Easy Meat, that's his all-time favorite album, number 1, then yes. But if this is just a list of his all-time favorite albums, the top 10, and they can shift around, they're just members of the top 10, then we would make it a bulleted list. So in this case, we can interpret that because it is a numbered list, the number 2, Sodom, Agent Orange, must be his second favorite. So you can see that there is actually a big difference between bulleted lists and numbered lists. We're going to talk about charts, graphs, and tables here a little bit. We aren't going to go into super detail, but you need to know what they are and how they work, and how to choose between them. Each of these different types of graphic, it carries a different type of information. So a chart is going to show a structure, maybe a parts of a whole. A table is going to be laid out in rows and columns. And a graph is going to show relationships between quantifiable data. So if we look at examples here, the table up at top, it has rows going across, columns going up and down, lots of nice space to tell the difference between. We have some alignment going on that tells us what belongs with what. We have some good contrast, repetition going on. Notice how the document design principles are really used in the table here. Then we've got a graph, and then we've got a chart. Generically speaking, graphs and charts can be lumped together in the category of quote-unquote figures. Tables and figures are different things. So when we start talking about labeling these, tables always get their own labels. Figures can be graphs, charts, or pretty much anything that is not a table. When you put graphs, charts, tables into documents, you need to always put a label and a caption on them. Labels are going to go in specific places. For the most part, you want to label tables up at the top, Charts, graphs, icons, pictures, anything else, figures, generally speaking, they get labeled at bottom. You want to provide a specific and descriptive caption for them, and you always want to number your tables and figures separately. These are somewhat abstract ideas. I'll try to give an example here that'll make sense when you see them. So let's look at this table. Table 8.1, a basic table. Notice that caption is up there at the top, so that a basic table, that tells us what is this thing. Table 8.1, that is our label. That tells us what is this. So it is this thing, it's a table. It is table 8, or actually this is table, probably chapter 8, first table in the chapter. So we've clustered them up at the top of the table, given it a very specific label and a descriptive caption. Then down here in figure 818, we've given it a label of figure 818. So in this case, figure from chapter 8, it's the 18th figure. And then we give us a very specific caption that tells us what exactly is it we're looking at. So what is this object and what is inside it? Now, you're going to look at this and say, hey, wait, what's going on? Dr. Arnett, isn't this backward from what you told us? These things, they have they're figures, but they're labeled at top. Well, yeah, they are. The thing is, everything I tell you in this class, I mean everything, at some point you will need to violate and say, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something totally different. Point being here, for the purposes of this document that has been created, this layout with the label and caption up at top, it works really well. So I wouldn't mess with this. I'd say, yeah, cool, totally. But when you guys are creating things, I would recommend that for figures and anything that is not a table, put that label and caption down at bottom. For a table, put it up at top. Text in tables, some ideas for doing so. Sometimes you're going to put grid lines in a table, sometimes you won't. If you do use grid lines, use a sans serif font in your table. It'll be easier to read. So, as an example, take a look at these two. They are exactly the same information, but one of them is a lot easier to read than the other. Why is that? It's because the one below, the sans serif font, serifs tend to make your eye blend. Or I shouldn't say make your eye blend, but your eye will tend to blend the serifs with the horizontal lines, and it'll be just difficult to read. So if you use and you should not always do this, but if you ever use grid lines like this in a table, then I'd very, very strongly recommend that you make the contents of the table into a sans serif font. That's the end of this video lecture series. It's not everything that you would ever need to know about document design, but it'll give you a lot of the important principles that you can use, and I've given you enough to point you in the right direction so that you can start to make things that work well, and at the very least you are going to avoid visual atrocities. Thanks very much. If you ever have questions about any of this or anything else, please feel free to contact me.